It's time to slow down. Now let your shoulders drop. Let your breath soften. Clow? Your thoughts to float gently, like fallen leaves drifting down a quiet stream. There's nothing you need to do right now. No tasks to complete. No worries to carry. Good! This is your time. To rest, to listen, to sink into softness. Feel the weight of your body gently supported, whether you're curled up under a blanket, lying still in bed, or resting your head against a pillow. Let the room around you fade into calm shadows. Let the outside world melt away. Just you, your breath, kun, and the whisper of a story, waiting patiently to be told. Now, close your eyes if you like, and listen, cood, as our story tonight begins. Our story tonight begins. In a time long ago, in a world shaped by candlelight and stone, in the heart of a wide valley stood the beginnings of a cathedral. A grand, towering thing, not yet finished. Its bones of stone reaching slowly toward the sky. It was a place of quiet craft, where hammers tapped like soft heartbeats, and sawdust hung in golden light. Where scaffolding creaked like sleepy lullabies, and wind brushed against the high beams like breath across skin. Could Dan, high among those beams, moving silently, was a cat. Her name was unknown to most. But to the stonemason who worked among the gargoyles and arches, she was called Luma, a name that meant light. Ku whispered under his breath like a secret blessing. Luma was small and silken, with fur the color of old parchment, and paws so gentle they made no sound. She lived among the rafters, where warm straw and quiet corners waited, and where the wind told secrets through the latticed stone. Each night, as the sun dipped behind the hills and shadows pooled in the corners of the unfinished nave, the stonemason would stay behind, long after the other workers had gone. He was an old man with a slow, steady rhythm, his chisel tapping out soft lullabies into stone. His beard was the color of morning frost, and his eyes had the depth of someone who'd spent a lifetime looking up toward things bigger than himself. But he did not carve only saints and scrolls and holy symbols. No. When the others had packed away their tools, when silence returned to the cathedral like a gentle tide, he carved something different. Deep in the corners, tucked between arches, beneath ledges, behind gargoyles' wings. He carved animals, tiny owls with stone-feathered wings, foxes curled into slumber, snakes coiled in quiet curves, mice nibbling at invisible crumbs. Man, always, a small cat, mid-step, as if just passing through. Luma would watch him from the rafters, her green eyes glowing like lanterns in the shadows. She never meowed, she never purred. She simply was a watcher, a guardian. Cut, a whisper of presence in the stillness. Ta. Sometimes, when the chisel paused, the old mason would look up at her and smile softly, as though the silence between them was a shared language. And as night deepened, and stars blinked one by one into the velvet sky above the open ceiling, Luma would stretch her limbs, balance on a beam, and begin her nightly walk. A quiet journey across the bones of the cathedral. Paws brushing dust into motes of golden air. Tail swaying like a slow bell's rope. The world below her, asleep, and above. Ona! The stars. And as you listen, let your breath fall into rhythm. Like the tap, tap, tap of a mason's chisel echoing through stone halls. Each breath, a gentle step across a dusty beam. each pause. Good. A quiet moment in the stillness of night. Let your imagination walk softly now, beside Luma, as she moves through silence. The wind stirred faintly through the high arches. Gah! A hush of cool night air weaving through stone columns like a wandering ghost. It whispered secrets from far away, from meadows and mountains, from the echoing chambers of time itself. Luma paused at the edge of a wooden beam, her whiskers twitching, ears turning toward some distant sound. But there was only the sigh of the wind and the soft creak of old wood shifting beneath her gentle paws. Beneath her, the cathedral stretched wide and dim. Unfinished walls reached like ribs toward the heavens. Goo! The floor far below shimmered faintly with moonlight that spilled through open windows and half-built towers. And at the center of it all, Stonemason still worked, bent over a hidden corner of an arch. He shaped a tiny creature. This one, a bird, mid-flight, wings outstretched. His hands were steady, but his eyelids drooped now and then with the weight of years. In the hush of night, he had been a young man when the foundation was first laid. He remembered when the first stone was blessed, when the bishop held a feather quill and signed the plans in red ink. That ink, he'd once told Luma with a soft chuckle, had been mixed with real cinnabar. A deep, brilliant red pigment once reserved for royalty and sacred seals. Its dust, though toxic, was prized in the hands of monks and artisans. A color of power and devotion. Luma had blinked at him then, head tilted as if absorbing the story. And now, she watched again, as the little bird took shape under his fingers. A secret fluttering spirit soon to be hidden behind a beam, where only the curious or the cats might find it. Above him, Luma padded onward, past a long stone ledge where statues waited in stillness, faces half-formed, hands folded in eternal patience. Each one seemed to dream of prayers not yet spoken, songs not yet sung, light not yet poured through stained glass. She brushed against the shoulder of a saint, her fur leaving a trace no one would see. And on she walked, gun. In the corner of the unfinished choir loft, a small brass bell hung on a nail. It had once been tied to a rope, used to call masons back to work after breaks. Now it hung forgotten. But when Luma passed beneath it, the air stirred just enough, and it chimed. A single note, clear and soft as water in a clay cup. The sound rippled through the vast, empty space, echoing gently through stone, until it faded into hush again. Below, the stonemason paused. He looked up, toward the loft, and a faint smile curved his lips. He didn't call to her. He never did. He simply turned back to his carving as the night wrapped itself around the cathedral like a velvet cloak. Kai and Luma. Silent, clever Luma moved like a whisper into deeper shadows. With every breath, let yourself sink a little further. Feel the cool hush of the cathedral air, the scent of old stone and worn wood. And the quiet company of flickering starlight above. Your thoughts may drift, like dust in golden beams, free to settle wherever they feel most calm. Let the story carry you softly onward. Luma stepped lightly along the curve of an arch, where time itself seemed asleep. This was her favorite part of the cathedral, a quiet nook beneath the roof, where shadows made soft nests among the wooden scaffolds. She paused here often, not to hunt, not to watch, but simply to be. Bellow. The faint sound of the mason's chisel echoed still, but fainter now, slower, as if the stone itself had begun to dream. Once Long ago, Luma had been born beneath these beams, among curls of straw and scraps of linen left behind by the masons on cold nights. Her mother had curled around her and her siblings, eyes glowing in the darkness. Only Luma remained now. She had stayed, busy if she belonged to the cathedral as much as the stone did, as if the builders had carved her into its very heart. Good! And perhaps they had... Years ago, the old mason had chiseled her likeness into a corner corbel. A tiny cat perched lazily in carved ivy. Good! It was so subtle, so skillfully blended into the curling leaves that most never noticed it. But she did. She passed it now, and paused, gazing at the tiny stone face that mirrored her own. Could, too. Green glass beads had been pressed into the eyes rare for that time. They had come from a shipment of Venetian glass the bishop had ordered. Too valuable to waste, but the mason had hidden them there anyway. A gift no one would understand, except Luma. She blinked slowly at the sculpture, then stepped past it, tail brushing the stone. The stars outside had shifted, their soft light now spilled through the unfinished rose window, casting delicate lacework, shadows, onto the stone floor below. The rose window was one of the cathedral's proudest features, its tracery shaped like unfurling petals. Though its stained glass was not yet placed, the carved openings caught the night in beautiful, fractured patterns. Luma walked toward that window, where the stone felt cooler beneath her feet. Good! And where the wind carried a scent of lavender from the distant hills. Gasped. That breeze stirred her fur as she stood in the circle of moonlight, gazing out across the sleeping valley. Lo, the town was still. Candlelight flickered in a few windows, and far off, a single dog barked, then fell quiet again. Time moved differently up here, as if the cathedral stood half in this world and half in another, where night never ended. Gah! And the stars whispered secrets only cats could hear. She stretched again, arching her back, her claws clicking once against the wood. Then she turned and padded back toward the nave. The stonemason was gone now. Good! His chisel lay still upon the floor beside a block of unfinished stone. He had left quietly, as always, his lantern flickering like a golden firefly in the dark. Bugged his work remained. Gah! The tiny bird, nearly finished, seemed almost to flutter with life. Its wings curved upward, as if about to take flight. Into the very rafters where Luma walked now. Good. And perhaps, just perhaps, when no one was watching, it did feel how the stillness settles now. Like soft dust on stone. Good. Like a lullaby caught between echoes and silence. Good. You are safe here, wrapped in the calm hush of ages past, watching, listening, drifting, as Luma continues her quiet walk beneath the sky. She moved like a memory now, soft, unhurried, a hush-given shape and breath, through broken archways and beneath half-finished buttresses. Her path wove among shadows older than she was, older even than the oldest stone. Sometimes she paused. Sometimes she sat, and watched the wind play with the scaffolding ropes, twisting them ever so gently, as if some invisible spirit of the air were weaving them into lullabies. There were places only Luma had seen, corners where moss had begun to grow despite the stone and mortar, nests tucked into forgotten beams by brave little birds, and handprints on pillars left behind by apprentices long gone, smudged into history. Once, she had found a dropped charm, a silver coin with a hole through its center, strung on fraying red thread. Some believed red thread warded off bad luck. Betta, who had lost it, had likely wept that day. She had watched him from above, as he searched the dusty floor again and again. Booty never found it. Luma had carried it in her mouth, tucked it into her nest, high in the roof beams. She didn't know what it was, only that it held sorrow, and she had kept it safe. Now, years later, it still lay there in her straw bed, next to a curl of sheep's wool, a dry feather, and a single smooth pebble that smelled faintly of rain. Good. As she neared that quiet corner again, a soft sound reached her ears. Not the creak of wood, not the hum of wind, but something else. Breath, soft, steady, slow. The stonemason was not gone after all. Instead, he had laid himself down near the altar stones, his cloak pulled over his shoulders, his lantern still glowing faintly beside him. Cut! His tools lay tucked in their cloth. Spoots, worn thin at the toes, rested beside him, and his hand. His old, strong hand was curled gently around a carving, a tiny stone rabbit, so detailed it seemed alive. Luma crept down the scaffold. She moved like mist along the walls, her shadow rippling across the unfinished pillars. She reached him and paused. There was something different tonight. His breathing, slower than usual, quieter than usual. As though even his dreams had gone still. She curled beside him, pressing her warmth into the folds of his cloak. She did not meow. She did not purr. But she watched. Goo. The moonlight came through the high windows now, silvering the altar stones, casting long shapes across the walls. And then, very softly, very slowly, the stonemason opened his eyes. He did not speak, but when he looked at her, his eyes crinkled at the corners, and his breath trembled with a sound halfway between a sigh and a smile. Luma blinked. Once, twice, he reached out and touched her head, his fingers light as dust, and then he closed his eyes again. Let the hush surround you now, like an old wool cloak in winter, like candlelight brushing the edges of your dreams. Coo. Your body is heavy, still, but your thoughts float gently now, following the soft pads of Luma's paws, through shadow and silence and stone. Luma curled beside the mason, her body warm and still, like a breath held in the space between notes. Above them, the cathedral side, timbers shifting ever so faintly, stones settling with its ancient weight, as if the building itself were exhaling into sleep. The great unfinished arches reached up like arms in prayer, open to the stars above. And through those openings, a drift of moonlight slowly crossed the stones. It was the hour when all things slowed, when even the bells in distant towers paused their song, when birds dreamed of flight, and fields, silent and silvered with dew, slept without worry. Good. In that gentle hour, the old mason dreamed. Tuku. His mind, loosened from the world of chisels and scaffolds, wandered among memories. He saw again the first stone he ever carved, a simple block, shaped by trembling hands, while an older mason watched in silence. Coo. He saw the faces of fellow craftsmen, some long gone, some now too tired to climb ladders, their laughter echoing faintly behind his thoughts. And he saw Luma. Not this Luma, but the one from years ago. Her mother, perhaps. Gert, or another before her. A cat, always watching. Always walking high among the beams. Always silent. Cootie had never spoken of it to others, but he'd known deep in some quiet part of himself that the cathedral had always had a cat. She was not a pet, not a stray. She was part of it. Good. As much as the stones, as much as the echoes, as much as the prayers caught in the cold air of morning. He breathed in. Slow, long, and his chest rose beneath the folds of his cloak. "Be," said him. Luma blinked again. Her tail curled in a soft question. She watched him, still and patient, like all cats who live close to the edge of mystery. "Goodnight." Without sound, she stood. "Coo." She stepped over the cloth, over the tiny stone rabbit, and walked to the center of the cathedral floor. There, where someday the light from stained glass would fall in reds and blues, she sat, and she waited. Above her, the stars turned. Far off, an owl called once. The wind brushed the stones with a touch like a lullaby. "Good." And in the stillness, a shift occurred. A ripple. The air seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. And then, with a breath soft as silk, the first snowflake of the night drifted through the open roof. It turned in the air, slowly, like a falling petal, and landed on the tip of Luma's ear. She did not move. She only blinked. And then another flake. And another. Could. Until the cathedral was no longer just a place of stone and dust, but a cradle for winter's hush. Boo. Each snowflake is like a slow breath, falling from the sky with no rush, no purpose but to rest. Just like you, right now, resting gently beneath this quiet sky of story and time. Let your thoughts be soft as snow, settling wherever they wish, melting into peace. Snow filtered through the gaps in the unfinished ceiling like scattered petals from some silent sky tree, each one delicate, unique. Could. A fleeting shape no one would ever see again. They landed on beams, on chisel marks, on the shoulders of statues, still waiting for their faces. Could. And they landed on Luma's back, dotting her fur with little crystals that shimmered for a moment, then vanished. She didn't shake them off. She didn't move. She was still watching the snowfall with wide, wondering eyes that reflected moonlight and memory. Could. The cathedral, which had always carried echoes of work, hammers, footsteps, God. Scaffolding groans was now filled with something else entirely. Silence. True silence, the kind that feels like music paused. A note held forever in the space just before it's played. Luma blinked slowly, and then rose to her feet. She walked along the center path of the nave. Cool. The very same path where wedding processions would someday pass, where acolytes would carry flickering candles, and the voices of choirs would rise like incense into the air. But tonight, there were only paw prints and snow, soft and vanishing, melting as quickly as they were made. She stopped at the altar, got a rough slab for no one finished, waiting for its carved borders. It was here she sat again, present, patient, as if guarding something precious. Could. And far behind her, a faint rustle. The stonemason had stirred. Slowly, gently. He sat up, blinking into the stillness. Snow had gathered on his cloak. The lantern beside him had gone out, but he didn't seem to mind. He looked across the space and saw Luma sitting at the altar, surrounded by snowfall and shadow. And for a long time, he simply looked. He saw not just a cat, but a memory, a presence, something holy in its own quiet way. He rose with care, his bones creaking softly, and walked toward her, his footsteps muffled by a thin blanket of white. When he reached her, he knelt. Not out of pain, could not from age, but from reverence, the kind that builds quietly over years, not in words, but in time spent carving beauty into places no one would ever see. They stayed like that for a while. A man and a cat, in a place not yet finished, but already full. Snow fell around them in slow spirals, dusting the world in peace. And high above, good! In the open rafters, a shape watched silently. Another cat, or perhaps the shadow of one carved into the beams long ago. No one remembered placing it there. No drawings showed it. No records named it. But it had always been part of the cathedral, just like Luma. Just like the old mason. God, just like the silence. Let your breath match the snow's descent. Slow, effortless, clud. Let your chest rise and fall like the gentle roll of wind across the valley. You're floating now. Between a dream and a memory, between hush and heart. Let's follow them. The mason and a cat. The old man sat beside Luma for a long while, his knees in the snow, his hands warm despite the cold. Dung. And though he did not speak, his silence was full of stories never written, of stone not yet carved, of quiet thanks whispered to the night. He reached into the folds of his cloak and pulled out a bundle wrapped in linen. Carefully folded, carefully tied, cut. He laid it on the altar stone, unwrapping it with fingers that trembled more from meaning than age. Inside, a carving. Not yet finished, but nearly there. It was her. Luma curled in sleep. Tail wrapped to nose, ears tucked just so, made of limestone from the same quarry that had birthed the cathedral's pillars. Cootie had worked on it in secret, in the quiet hours after the others had gone. Each night, a little more. A gentle paw here, a soft fur line there. He hadn't known why at first, but now, sitting beside her, with snow falling like the sky's breath, he understood. Some things, good, are not made for others to see. Some things, made only because the heart needs to make them. He placed the carving in the very center of the altar. Good. No one would leave it there, of course. Once the bishop returned, once the masons resumed. But for now. Just for now. I belong there. Luma stood slowly, circled the altar once, then leaped lightly onto the stone slab. She sniffed the carving, paused. Then, without fanfare, curled up beside it. Two cats, one living, one stone. But somehow, the same. The mason chuckled softly. A sound like dry leaves in an autumn breeze. He sat down again, resting his back against the pillar, and closed his eyes. Snow fell. Not fast. Not heavy. Just enough to quiet the air. And outside the cathedral, the world began to sleep. The valley below glowed faintly with frost, rooftops coated in silver hush. Gah. The river, narrow and slow, reflected the stars, as though a second sky ran through the earth. Bah! And in the town, windows flickered with the final sighs of candlelight. Mothers tucked children beneath woolen blankets. Good! Fathers stirred the last coals in hearths. All across the land, night gathered gently. Good! And in the heart of the unfinished cathedral, a cat slept beside her own reflection, and a mason dreamed of nothing at all. Just breath. Just stillness. Just snow. Feel yourself wrapped in this moment. Coo. As if the cathedral has unfolded around you, like a shelter made of shadow and snow. Each word, a snowflake landing softly on your skin. Each pause, a breath held gently, so that the world can sleep beside you. You are safe here. You are still. Let us return now. Good, to the heart of the quiet. The snow had slowed now, becoming less a fall and more adrift. Good. A graceful suspension between sky and earth. The rafters above glistened faintly, as if the stars themselves had dusted them with frost. In her sleep, Luma stirred only once. A gentle shift of paws, a sigh like the whisper of leaves. The little stone carving lay beside her, its shape catching silver glints of starlight and the pale blue hush of moon. Could. The mason, too, had grown still again. Could. His breathing had deepened, his frame relaxed against the pillar, as if it had always been there to hold him. Could. And in that moment, something ancient awakened. Not a sound, not a vision, but a knowing. Could. A gentle sense that this place, this cold, unfinished cathedral, was not empty, that it had never been. It held the breath of every mason who had ever placed a stone, the sigh of every monk who had dreamed of its walls, the prayers that had never yet been spoken. Coon, and the quiet love of one man for the work he'd never lived to see complete. Tom here had softened, edges blurred. Somewhere, deep within the stone, was the memory of voices. Could. Of music drifting, like smoke through morning mist. Candles flickering against stained glass not yet hung. Could. Of footsteps in procession, robes brushing the floor. It was as if the cathedral remembered its future and offered a glimpse. To those who paused long enough, Tilly sang, "Coo." A single flake landed on her nose, and she opened one eye, gazing not at the man beside her, but beyond, toward the high archway that would someday frame a great wooden door. There was movement there, a faint ripple. Not threatening, not even real. Perhaps just something old. Could. A presence. Okay? A breath of history, passing through like the hush of wind through tall grass. And then quiet again. Luma blinked once, then tucked her head under her tail. She knew, in the way animals always do. This was a good place. A sacred place. Not because it was holy, but because it was loved. By hands. By time. By snow. And silence. Good. The snow stopped completely now, and the stars above shone clearer, crisp in the cold air. One fell, just one. A soft streak of light across the sky. No one saw it. Its path was mirrored by the curve of Luma's back. Could. The curve of the arches above, and the line of the stonemason's sleeping shoulders. Everything. In stillness. Everything. Good. In rest. The night had wrapped the cathedral in its gentlest hush, but now, very faintly, a new presence stirred at the farthest edge of the world. A glow. Not bright, not urgent, but soft, like the memory of warmth after a long winter. Crept along the sky, slow as honey poured from a clay jar, casting blue-gray light onto the highest rafters first, then slipping downward, beam by beam, stone by stone. Luma blinked awake slowly, her golden eyes flickering in the new light, mirroring the warmth that had begun to color the edge of the sky. She stretched, a long, elegant stretch that ran through her spine and curled through the tips of her claws. A yawn followed, delicate and silent, revealing a flash of pink tongue and tiny teeth before she tucked herself into a sitting pose. Blinking serenely into the slow dawn, the stonemason stirred too, his body stiff with sleep, his mind still heavy with dreams that clung to his chest like dew on morning grass. He rubbed his eyes with calloused fingers, then looked around as if surprised to find himself there, curled beneath scaffolding, with snowflakes melting on his shoulders, and Luma watching him like a quiet sentinel. The moment held. Could. A perfect pause between night and day, before the cathedral began to breathe again. Because Even though its walls were unfinished, its windows bare, and its towers incomplete, it had always breathed. With every echo, every footstep, every whisper between stone and sky. And today, that breath carried a memory. The stonemason rose slowly, wincing at the cold in his joints, and turned his gaze upward. He didn't speak. He rarely did, but his thoughts were loud enough for the stones to hear. He walked the edge of the scaffolding, careful of each step, and looked over the carving he'd left behind the night before. The lion was there, not fierce, but peaceful, its face half hidden in the shadows. And beside it, he ran a hand over a smaller shape. One he'd finished silently, without planning, guided only by the rhythm of sleep and snow. Curled gently into the curve of the stone, its back arched in perfect repose, its tail curled around its paws. Luma's ears twitched as he touched it. She recognized the shape, in the way all cats do. Care a kind of timeless mirror. Stone and flesh. Still and living. The mason smiled, just slightly, then placed a hand over his heart, as if sealing something inside himself. Not pride, just presence. Below, the lights continued to grow. Not gold yet, not fully dead, but the kind of quiet brightness that belongs only to early morning. When the world hasn't decided yet, if it's ready to begin. Luma patted softly down a narrow beam, pausing to rub her cheek against a wooden peg. It was her way of saying good morning. To the cathedral, to the snow, to the rising hush of morning bells that hadn't been cast yet. A bell would come someday, and when it did, the sound would carry up and outward, and the whole city would hear it. But for now, there was only the soft scrape of her paws and the hush of wings above as doves settled into the rafters. Luma wound her way down the beam, tail flicking ever so slightly for balance. Her movements were quiet, quieter than the snow melting outside, quieter than the sigh of wind weaving through the rose window frame. Below her, the scaffolding opened into a half-built nave, its stones damp with yesterday's frost. But there, just behind the pulpit's shadow, was a little wooden hatch. Few noticed it. Good, even fewer remembered it was there. But Luma knew. She leaped gracefully down, landed with a soft thump, and padded toward the hatch, as if following a rhythm she'd always known. With a gentle nudge of her head, the hatch creaked open, revealing a spiral stair carved long ago. Its stones worn smooth by feet and time. This stair was not on the cathedral plans. Not listed in the ledgers. Not even remembered by the older masons. It was built by a boy stonemason over 50 winters ago. Before the war, before the plague, before the bishop who commissioned the bell that would never ring. He carved the stair by moonlight, stone by secret stone, so he could watch the stars from the bell tower and whisper his dreams into the wind. Now, only Luma knew the path. She slipped through the shadow, tail brushing the edges of stone as the stair spiraled upward around her. Each step held an echo, a footfall lost to time, a memory pressed like a thumbprint in soft clay. And as Luma climbed, a soft ringing began to pulse in the distance. Not loud, not immemorial, just the memory of a bell that had never been cast. Could you see? The bell had been designed with gold threads and sacred numerals. Its tone would have been tuned to the human heart, so that every toll would echo deep inside the soul. But the war came. The funds vanished, and the bell was never made. Yet somehow, its sound lingered in the stairwell. At the top, Luma emerged into a tiny chamber, not much bigger than a cupboard. The ceiling bowed low, and dust blanketed the wooden floor like the hush of forgotten lullabies. Kuh! A single window, round and smooth as an old coin, looked out across the city, and on the ledge sat a stack of curled parchment sketches. Dozens of them. Old, brittle, lines drawn in charcoal and wax, showing angels, lions, doves, gargoyles, and cats. Not just one cat. Many. In different poses. Different corners of the cathedral, hidden in carvings, perched on arches, nestled beneath saints, tucked into the curls of vines on the choir stalls. The boy Mason, all those years ago, had been carving companions into the stone, quiet guardians to watch the worshippers, silent comforters for those who wept. Could and Luma. She was the last, perhaps not born yet when those sketches were made. Or perhaps the sketches dreamed her into being. No one could say. She curled herself into the dusty window's round frame, letting the last of the night slip behind her. Bah! Below, the mason had begun to work again. His chisel tapped the stone. Rhythmic, even, soft. It sounded like breathing, like the breath of the building itself. Kun. And Luma closed her eyes to the pulse of it all. She slept lightly, one ear twitching with each whisper of wind, guarding the sketches, the stare, and the bell that still hadn't rung. Not yet. Time moved differently in the upper chamber. Could. Not forward, not backward. Just gently, like a leaf drifting in a stream. Luma stirred in the window's cradle, bathed in pale winter sunlight that filtered through the glass like warm milk. Her tail twitched once, as if reacting to some soft sound far beyond human ears. Below, the cathedral breathed. It wasn't truly alive. Not in the way trees live or hearts beat, but it held memory like breath in the lungs. And every corner seemed to exhale with stories carved long before anyone remembered to write them down. The stonemason, gray now, but not old, paused in his morning's work. He'd been carving a corbel, a little animal to hold up a beam. Bah! And this one, unlike the dragons and hawks of previous weeks, was a curled cat. Its face was almost finished. Its eyes closed, as if dreaming of some other world. Bah! And while the tools rested for a moment, the mason reached for a small hourglass kept tucked near his satchel. It wasn't made of wood or metal, but of stone and glass, an oddity. The kind of thing only an alchemist would create. Sand moved inside it slowly, but not like normal sand. This sand glittered. It had once been pearl dust ground from broken beads offered at a shrine. Mixed with crushed rose hips and something rarer. Moon milk? Moon milk wasn't truly milk at all, but a kind of creamy mineral that formed in the dark folds of caves. In the Middle Ages, healers believed it softened the mind, slowed thoughts, and smoothed the edges of pain. So the mason had taken a pinch of it. Boo! From a long-forgotten apothecary, and asked a glass blower to trap time itself within the hourglass. It wasn't magical, but it felt sacred. Whenever he flipped it, he breathed slower. Chisels moved more carefully. Mistakes happened less often, and in that quiet moment, with the faint glimmer of the hourglass beside him, he whispered a little prayer. Not to saints, not to God, even, but to stone itself. Let this one hold comfort, he murmured, running a thumb across the still warm cat face. Let someone rest beneath her one day and feel less alone. Above, Luma's ears turned gently at the sound, but she didn't move. She'd heard that kind of whisper before. She had heard it in countless corners of the cathedral from woodworkers, mortars mixers, plasterers with cracked hands and aching backs. They never shouted their prayers. They never asked for riches. Plea? For their work to ease someone's burden, to bring warmth in winter, shade in summer, silence when grief needed room to breathe. Could! And as the stonemason turned the hourglass again, Luma stood. Soft paws landed on the stairs curve, and she descended once more into the slow rhythm of the cathedral's day. Her route was not hurried. It never was. Could. She wandered between pews, brushed past the soft wool of a sleeping beggar, and paused beside the altar where someone had left a fig wrapped in cloth. She sniffed it, turned away, and padded toward a narrow shaft of light where dust danced like feathers. Her tail flicked once. She yawned. Could. And through the vaulted ceiling above, a dove cooed gently in the rafters. Time passed, but not as you'd expect. Could. It passed like the whisper of breath. Could. On cold stone. Could it passed like sleep when it comes softly. As afternoon spilled gently across the stained glass windows, the colors on the floor shifted. From deep blues to soft amber, like honey poured across old wood. Luma followed the golden stripe as it curved near the side nav, her paws silent on the smooth stones. Could. She passed under archways that echoed with old songs. Songs sung, not with instruments, but with hands. Long ago, before the great cathedral had a choir, the stonecutters and plasterers had created a rhythm of their own. Cool. It wasn't music. Not in the way we usually think of it. But in the Middle Ages, many artisans used tools like instruments, chisels that clinked in patterns, hammers that struck in time. Each trade had its own rhythm, and when they all worked together, the space filled with what people called could, the choir of quiet hands. Luma had heard that rhythm return from time to time. Not every day. Blah! Only when the workers were especially focused, when breath and tool and stone moved as one, and today, she heard